Welcome to the Digital Marketing Victories podcast, a monthly show where we celebrate and learn from the change makers in digital marketing. I'm personally obsessed with how digital marketers sell through and get their ideas executed. I'm your host, Katherine Watier. I'm the owner of WO Strategies, LLC. We focus on organic discovery for our enterprise clients with a training-centered approach. Today, we're joined by Tony Kopetchny. Tony is the co-founder and CEO of Parsons TKO, the engagement architecture consulting firm that serves mission-driven organizations working with nonprofit leaders to reduce stress over technology choices, ease anxieties and organizational tensions through change management, and gain new perspectives on data. He holds an BA in film from Temple University and an MA in international communications from American University. He currently resides in Fort Worth, Texas with his wife, daughter, and 3 doggies, Rocky, Apollo, and Philly. So this episode is going to be perfect for you if you've ever wondered how to be persuasive in managing a digital transformation project, know more about how to read the room during the moment in order to be more persuasive, and how to successfully handle moments of conflict with clients and still be effective. So without further ado, here's our interview with Tony. Tony, thanks for agreeing to be on our podcast.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here today. Really looking forward to the conversation.
Great. So can you just tell our listeners more about your background, about yourself, and how you became involved in digital transformation, particularly this movement from film to what you're doing now? I think is fascinating.
Yeah, 100%. I'm also the worst at talking about myself, so I'll try to weave the story together. But I went to film school. It was late 90s. And there was this thing called the internet that everyone was really excited about in the 90s. And I learned how to build some websites. But, in film school, we were still shooting on actual film. We had to develop it. And then by my senior year, I teamed up with a buddy and we shot the first ever digital video for a senior thesis at Temple University. And we wanted to do it because we were allowed to have 30 minutes instead of 10 for the short film. Then I launched, we took that film and then we started a small film company. Neither of us were smart enough to have taken any business courses before that. And I went to Hollywood and tried to figure out how the big dogs played the game. And then we started building websites and doing print flyers and things as a company. Decided I came back. Had done semester at sea as an undergrad. Always wanted to get into international relations. I grew up in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I didn't realize international relations was a thing you could study to try to get a job in. So I moved to DC, got into grad school, wanted to be a policy wonk, and then everybody hired me because I could build websites and shoot video. That led me to my first website redesign at an organization. I got really excited by the process. I thought it was really cool, doing a lot of work on that. I was really excited when email marketing, the first time I did that with Constant Contact and I started watching the numbers, I was like, oh, this is so cool. And then went off to an agency after that, doing a bunch of website redesigns for a bunch of think tanks. But it was really at the U.S. Institute of Peace, which is my next in-house job after that, where I was doing a website redesign, bringing a CRM system in, taking them from, 1980s tech stack to, mid 2000s tech stack, and tons of extremely smart people who worked there. And one of them, as I was doing interviews, she looked at me and she said, the reason everyone's getting so upset with you isn't about the technology. It's because you're changing the culture. And I was like, oh, okay, well, there's that. And I had personally studied, it was, my master's degree did a lot into cultural anthropology. So I was like, it's not about my technical acumen anymore in digital transformation. This is really about people. This is about thinking about how they're going to react to something rather than what the thing is itself. And so that's kind of where I got into this and how I kept going and sort of built a career from there.
Yeah, I think I discovered you because we were on the same listserv and you were, I believe, offering Google Analytics for webinars and services. And I was like, oh, that's fascinating. Anyway, so it's very similar to what the things folks do when they're working in digital marketing and SEO, trying to transform how folks are working and point out things that aren't working well and try to pivot them.
Mm-hmm.
So what exactly does your agency do? What is this transformation stuff that you work on there?
Yeah, 100%. So, we've our pivot, we are a consulting firm. And we focus with nonprofits. I'd say the mission-driven sector too. I mean, I wouldn't exclude a for-profit that's trying to make some positive change in the world, but we really have sector expertise with think tanks, cultural institutions, higher ed, professional membership associations, policy advocacy organizations. If you're any of those, come talk to me. But it's a lot of capacity building. There's what is the internal infrastructure around being able to get your messages out and retain an audience? What's the governance? What's the process? Why do you have these systems? Do the systems talk? Where's the data flowing? What type of data do you have? What kind of questions do you have about your data? Do you even know if you're collecting it accurately? A lot of the work too we get into is inertia breaking.
Mm.
There is a massive amount of status quo in the nonprofit sector, and pre-COVID, I was starting to talk about it. I had read this book, The Urban Monk, and he was talking about people who don't move enough, and your body sits still. And he talks about stagnant water, and stagnant water breeds disease. And I started thinking about that analogy in terms of status quo within an organization. Like if you're not trying to always get better, you really are stuck and you're just sitting there. And what's going to happen is there's a rot that happens and nobody can really see it. And some of that with the inertia breaking is people got silo busters. I don't really know if they're silos as much as you're just sort of set in your daily routine. And this is your department. These were your annual goals. This was your tasks, and you're doing what you can to get through to the day because you got to deliver on these things. And it's really hard to look up and across.
About that. It's kind of struck me that a lot of times, in order to get people motivated to change what they're doing, you have to change their incentive system and their job description and what their manager evaluates them on. But in my in-house history, even though I was doing digital marketing and more like cutting edge building stuff, I don't think anybody reviewed my job description. Now that I think about it, if you have the same role year after year, the space changes so fast. Perhaps your actual job description should shift, even though you don't get promoted.
I mean, it would be good to reflect on. I know for myself, when I was in-house, I think people struggled with what they call me. And I always get a title of like special project person or something.
Right?
Like
Yeah.
that. Like anything that's not in this other
I
well-defined
had
piece.
insights in my title at Ketchum, so yes.
Oh, that's kind of cool though.
But yeah, it's big, right?
Right.
Anyway, I just don't know that you pivot what people are doing. Corporate maybe, but in the nonprofit sector, I don't know that it ever gets down to that level. I mean, you talk about like, what do you want to learn next year, professional development wise, and that sort of gets baked into something, but it's not a conversation around TikTok is the new thing. And I need you to figure out how to do TikTok because that's where our audience. It's not that usually, unless you've seen that.
No, I have not seen that as
Yeah.
much. There's really still a reliance on heavy hierarchical structures.
Yeah.
And I think there's something to it, maybe, but it hurts a little bit when you get into transformation modes. It's, probably going to dive into it a little bit later, but I think we struggle with collaborative creative meetings. Who's supposed to talk? Should everybody talk? Why are you in there? And how do we, if you're a junior staff and I'm the senior staff, how do I enable everyone to be able to talk and feel comfortable in those situations? And I think that sort of power dynamic hurts transformation. It hurts progress because we don't let enough voices come out. And sometimes you're wrong. Like, so what? Have 100 ideas come to the surface. You're not going to use all of them. Maybe you use one of the 99, and the other 99 are great. But at least if everyone got to partake, now you start building a team. Now you start feeling like, hey, I'm here and I'm valued. I was allowed to have this opinion today. People listened to me today.
So how much are you doing with again, coming back to your agency, when you're working with organizations, are you helping them reevaluate their audience, where their audience is, what their audience wants, how their audience wants to support the mission, that kind of stuff? How often are you noticing that that's gotten stale
I mean, we
or it's
come in
inaccurate?
a little bit of both. I mean, we come in at a lot of different angles, try to meet an organization where they're at. I'll tell you this too, we were using digital transformation. So we were founded in 2013. We really hit the streets pretty hard. 2015, 2016 is when we started going full time. And man, digital transformation is just a lead balloon. Like nobody wanted that. Nobody understood it. It was so big and obtuse. And this is where we came up with the phrase engagement architecture. So we're like, okay, architecture, people kind of get, sounds cool, but it's all about engagement. And, for us in the nonprofit space, what I was enamored with was this book called The Attention Merchants by Tim Wu. And he's talking about the attention economy. And I was like, okay, well, that's great. You're a nonprofit. You need attention, but like, you're not going to write a salacious headline just to get a click on your site. It's not your incentive model. You need engagement. You need someone to get on your email list. So then you can start following up with them. So then you can get a donation, and then you can make them feel really good and turn them into a recurring donor. And that type of thing, I think is obscured by the heavy weight of what private sector marketing or advertising is really all about, which is more of a mass media approach. They do just want to click. They do just want a little bit of an impression, and so it's a different model, but it's ingrained back to the nonprofit sector because the private sector has more money to have more conferences and more writing and more materials about it. And so, we're really trying to help people think that way. On the audience side, what I'd say is, coming through the pandemic, I think there was an awakening, for the world. I think we're all seeing that, and on lots of different levels, right? Social justice, all the equity issues. But then an audience, it was at times such a blur. I don't know if you feel that way too, but maybe it's a year ago now, year and a half, we started getting a lot of questions about, it started with, I need to diversify revenue, and it turned, I need to diversify my audience. And it was like, oh, what do you really mean by that? Like, is that especially in the DC area, right? Is that subcontext for, are we talking diversity, or are you talking, you just want to broaden your audience?
And as in you just need more donors, and you just,
right.
And
yeah, you're not in the right mark. And I want people from Iowa too, not just
right.
Coast. And I'd say it was all of the above. And what it has really revealed is, all of 2002, segmentation is really back in trend, and most people can't segment. They have switched and transitioned and been on too many systems. There's been bad internal upkeep, the knowledge management of, why do you have this record, not that record? Why are you collecting this data point? Well, that one was out of the box. So it's really, I feel like a lot of times what we're being brought in to do is help see where they're at the moment, and then tune and try to steer them forward. Social listening, people love the phrase. I like it too. I think it's really cool. But really, the whole premise is, you have an audience that you want to go meet. But I just don't show up at someone's house and start talking really loud and expect they're going to be my friend.
Right.
Or I'm going to go to the new play community. I got to go and watch and see what they're talking about, and, how they're talking about the language. Then I could sort of come and present myself and my ideas too, in a way that will jive with the community. And it's too often that in the nonprofit space, there's this, well, we have a mission, so we're going to show up and everyone's going to care because I care about this mission. And they might think it's all right. They're probably not going to be anti you when you show up, but doesn't mean you're going to suddenly get this new audience just because you're in that new space. So there's a lot of that we're working on with groups right now too. And all the data recording that goes around that. But
it's funny. So do any of them have budget to actually do social listening? I mean, I know you're working with bigger nonprofits, but the social listening tools are pricey.
They are. I mean, some do. It's usually targeted. It's not like it's pretty quick. We'll do like a 2-week. We use a couple tools, and then we throw some comparisons together and sort of help them look at language. We also make sure that they're supplying us with, who they think the experts are. So then we can go and look and sort of create a halo around those folks and try to find the other influencers within that space. So it's very targeted. It's never very really open blue sky. And that's sort of what helps keep the budget down on it.
Yeah. Oh, that makes sense. And for those that are listening, if you're more interested in how to be successful on different social media platforms, you should check out our second episode with Joe Federer, who's written a book about how the different social platforms are sort of like a different social environment. And if you attempt to copy and paste the same stuff across every platform, you might not be very successful. I know when I was at Ketchum, when I was training on social media, one of the analogy I used was, you're not going to be walking into a friend's party and walk up to the first person you see and say, I've got a car to sell you, and just start pitching them on selling a car. They're going to kick you out of the party. You have to talk about something else before you start trying to sell somebody. Same thing on social media. So I know when we had our earlier conversation, before recording this podcast, you particularly talked about how, you mentioned it in the intro, actually, how technology is easy and people are hard. Can you share some experiences related to that, or tips about how to tackle the people part? Because that's the heart of this podcast, actually, is the people part.
Yeah, 100%. I like that phrase a lot. I started using it years ago as I was trying to think about how to pitch things through. Again, it was the the experience at the Institute of Peace really woke me up to the people part, where it was,
And how big is that organization? Because this is like a inside DC baseball thing. Most people wouldn't even
Oh,
know that
yeah.
organization exists.
Well, if you are an American citizen, you are paying tax dollars, which help for this wonderful organization called the United States Institute of Peace. It's congressionally funded, which means they're not, there's no one in there that's running on the politics circle. So they're not appointed. They're in there for the long haul, paid for by us, the citizens. They have done some amazing work with peace building overseas. And since they are congressionally funded, pure citizens like we are, they could go in and they don't have to affiliate as being with the US government, which helps them a lot when they're out there doing their work. For the tax dollars as an American, they are probably one of your extremely best investments. I think you pay probably half a cent or a cent a year for their budget. And they were under attack before, and they tried to have that killed by 2 senators or Congress members at the time. One of those was Anthony Weiner, and we all know what happened to him. So he got his just due. So at the time I was there, less than 200 people, organizations overseas, but it was in the growth phase. You know, it was before. So inside or DC, there's a building on the National Mall now. It was one of the last new construction after the African American Museum on the National Mall. Has this roof that's supposed to evoke a dove. It's very controversial. It's getting put in. So this was pre that. This was getting them ready for that. I was part of the team to help get them in there. So it was very growth phase. Like, okay, it's got the growth phase part is nice because you could do a lot and you're going to get some result, right? There's so much low hanging fruit when you're just starting to do this work. So that part was great. But there were people who had been there for years. They operated out of a very small location, undisclosed. It was actually in the National Restaurant Association building at the time. So people used to think, oh, sure, Institute of Peace, you're not the CIA? We're like, no, we're really not. But just that's to say there was a lot of the status quo momentum. They were publishing books. They were doing great work. They were, I know at the time, the president called it the best kept secret in Washington. And I was like, man, when you open that building with that roof, you are no longer the best kept secret in Washington.
You drive by it and you're like, what's that? Yeah.
So you need to be ready for this. And so I think the question was really just about how do you deal with the people? People are, hard. Technology is easy. Like technology is always going to do what it's supposed to do. It functions very well. What we've seen, and I say we, my company and my co-founder, Nate, when I started this. So one of the things when we first started the company, we talked about right fit technology, because one of the things was always you can get a best in class. It gets delivered. It never really lives up to the promise that you were sold because you don't have the capacity and the capabilities to take advantage of the tool. Salesforce, I think it's a perfectly great product. So I'm not trying to put a dig on it. I just think it is really big and it has hyped itself really heavily into the nonprofit space. And a lot of nonprofits have it, but then they don't invest in it. There's no staff member. There's no, who's the person who owns this? Who is the governance of the system? How does it work? Why is it going in there? How do I get a report out of it? Like there's a lot of work that has to go to make the thing happen. And that's all people stuff. I was in a conversation yesterday with Nate, and we were talking about conferences because I'm about to start hitting the conference circuit, and we were talking about artificial intelligence, and that's everyone's talking about that in nonprofit space. And I'm like, here's what's going to happen. There's going to be that, what do they call it? The science lab, the booths, the fair. There's going to be a whole bunch of technology there. Someone's going to have the AI tool, and it is going to sound like it hits every freaking requirement you've ever wanted, and is going to make all your dreams come true. But that software assumes that you have your shit together. It assumes that you have a governance and that you have process and you have policies and you have a staff that can work this and that you've got structured data that can get into a system to have sense made of it. You've got a taxonomy. You don't have any of that. That tool's not going to work. And it's not the tool's fault. So as people are hard, all of those layers, then that's all this change that you've got to bring into an organization. And it is not sexy. Hey, we got to stop and make a governance. You got to do a what?
Yeah.
I just wanted the AI thing, man. It told me like the next thing I'm supposed to do for the next owner.
It's fascinating that you're mentioning that because Google just finished rolling out their helpful content update, which has killed some sites that used AI, predominant AI in their content, as in like de-index them. You can't find them.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's not that every site that's using some AI generated tool, where you come up with an outline or maybe even the content for a page. Anyway, but some have been tanked.
It's fascinating.
Yeah. Google likes to know there's an expert behind your content generally. So I've always been a bit iffy. In fact, since you're in DC, you could go to the Planet Word Museum where they have an exhibit about how they can measure who has written the content, because it turns out as a writer, you have a unique fingerprint. So even if you write under a synonym, like J.K. Rowling with Harry Potter, they still know it's you.
Hmm.
So I wonder if Google does, considering they do in general know using AI, looking at different corpuses. Anyway,
Fascinating,
side
fascinating,
note,
and
so as
scary.
you brought up AI, you can use AI for other things, but all those are listening. I might not use it wholeheartedly across to all of the content on your website. just
Mm.
just a little note. um, so do you have a standard approach for handling digital change with your clients, or is it completely custom depending on where your clients are and how big they are and all the rest?
Approach, yes. I mean, we try to have a similar approach. So as a company, we can continue to learn and tune it, but everybody's situation is unique. So it's applying that to the current circumstances. But the common thread, honestly, is we talk to a lot of people. One
Mm.
thing when we were early on, we took a contract and we shouldn't have, because they were, no, I don't want you to talk to all these folks. That should have been just this
Oh,
ginormous red flag, because this work can't happen in a vacuum or silo or its own whatever. Bust out of it and get across to the other line. The inertia busting. That's really, I mean, that's the crux of it. You got to be willing to talk to people. You got to be willing to listen to a lot of people. And if there's people that are listening and they're in house or they're running one of these projects for the first time or they're trying to figure out what to do, you've got to listen to everybody. And the champions, you don't have to worry about them as much because they're already on board. You got to find the naysayers, and then you got to find the nuggets in the negativity. Like that's really the thing. Because
as in like the positive that you could spin, basically. What do
yeah,
you mean
well,
by nuggets?
I say there's nuggets of wisdom in the negativity that's coming out. They are negative about what's this experience. They're negative about the change that's coming for a reason. And some of it is personal. Some of it's, hey, I did this way for a long time. You moved my cheese and I'm just trying to get through the workday, man. And it's like, oh, I get you. But there is something else in there too, right? Like, and there, even that, you moved my cheese. I did it this way forever. Okay, well, if you're really not paying attention, then you're not thinking about the training that you're setting up and the type of training you're going to set up, how hands-on that training is going to be. What are you going to do to help this person cross that bridge? And so anyone who's already on board, you got fans. Like, great, grab their feedback. It's helpful. It's not as helpful as the negative folks. And you're not going to, it's like you're going to sway them necessarily to be positive about it. But over the course of time, if you're able to get them and be inclusive with them, it is going to help you in the long run to be more successful.
Hmm.
And that takes a lot, I think, from the people doing it. That's not, I mean,
So do you do that upfront? I mean, the first thing you do is discovery chats with everybody, and do you talk to their outside consultants as well?
yeah, it depends what we're working on. If it's around a specific tool, we would talk to all the people who used it. For our interview process, we do have a pretty robust process we come in with. We have standardized scripts. We do that on purpose because we're looking for similarities, but also the anomalies. Like, wow, this answer was super different from this person. Why is that so different than everybody else's? And then we use AI, but translators, we have a recording. So when we're recording the conversation,
Yeah.
the team doesn't have to stare and try to take notes. We're having the robots take the notes, pull it back out to us, and then over time, we've been able to train this, and that can also start to pull out some of the pieces from the conversation that are interesting. We
Mhm.
anonymize all of those afterwards, and then we create a report. A lot of times the executives want to see it. A lot of times the executives don't like what they're seeing. But we've had that before. Some of these questions have been like, give me some tough times you've been through. I mean, they don't like it, but it is the truth. And you have to be able to stand in that and stand with them and say, yeah, this is what was said. What do you want? I can't change it, but
Yeah.
we can make change together. And I think it's one of those things where when someone points out your flaw, it hurts at first. No one likes that. And we're not trying to do it in a mean or nefarious way, but here's where it's at. If you really want to be at the core of your own reality and how you can start to maneuver different based on the ground moment, this is it. And if you're the person who's doing that work, just be prepared. People don't always like what you're packaging for them.
That's fascinating, because I think I've also been really stunned by how real live user feedback is persuasive. Most of the time I've used it like audience research using user testing or whatever and provided that back to the client. And recently I did some of that sort of discovery work with a current client, like asking them about their target audience and stuff, and just great insights that came out of it. Um, getting back to the delivering of bad news, what tips do you have considering those of us in the digital space tend to deliver bad news maybe more frequently than other roles? Because you bring us in because things aren't working. So,
Right.
we're going to deliver the news that things aren't working often. It's not like we're going to come in and be like, that traffic decrease, never mind. It didn't really happen. Most of the time you're like, right, it did. Google hates you now or whatever. So what are your tips around being a better deliverer of bad news other than my default, which is I'm just delivering Google's rules sort of language?
Right. I think for myself, and then just what we try to infuse value wise in the company, I mean, you got to be honest, empathetic. You got to really, because, we could deliver something you didn't like the report. It was the truth. My company can still get paid and we're going somewhere else because you don't want to continue, but that might be somebody's job on the other end.
Mm,
So we really got to be empathetic towards how we're bringing the messages across. And anything negative isn't necessarily, I mean, it's not necessarily negative. It's like, hey, look, here's the truth of where you're at. Like, now let's get better. Like, we got so much information now. Let's improve. But you got to be earnest and you got to just be willing to say it. I think people try to, the phrase, I don't know if it was a phrase when I was younger, but like, I'm going to couch this in something comfortable where
mm.
nobody hears that shit. Say it the way it's supposed to be said, but say it honest, empathetically, and be earnest. And then let people sink it in, let them have their questions and the feedback, and let them know you're in it with them. You're going to fix this together. You're going
Yeah.
to move forward, right? Like I'd rather know where I'm not doing well and then have an opportunity to improve than someone just says, hey, you're doing okay. Am I? I don't know. It doesn't feel like I am.
So you had mentioned earlier a little bit, or you sort of hinted toward when you do the discovery, you can figure out that people are on the spectrum of technology adoption. Some of them are champions, your early adopters. But as the bell curve goes, you've got a couple laggards. And I know we kind of actually mapped this out when we did the plan for healthit.gov, knowing that some doctors would be laggards and there'd have to be like a stick to get them to transition. But what kind of approach do you have as an agency to kind of obviously you got to bring everybody on board. If you're trying to get them to pivot to a new technology, for them to see you as successful, you as an agency, ideally everybody adopts the new technology. So do you have sort of a different approach depending on the how you flag somebody as an adopter?
Hmm. I'd probably not. I feel like there's a point where if you're going to use it, you don't have a choice. You're going to be adopting it. You have to use it because your other tool is going to go away.
Oh
I
yeah.
think
Okay.
I think it's more the spectrum of, hey, this group over here is excited about it. This group isn't. What do I do with the group that is not excited about this? How do I pull them into the fold and get them ready to move forward? And I think it gets more complicated when it's a tool like a CRM that cuts across program areas. So it's then how do everyone wants to create these little teams and pulls them together, but they don't give them any teeth. Like, you got to get a real team if you're going to do that across departments that shares information. That meeting is sacrosanct. They're going to go. This is what they do. It's not just some committee that shows up once in a while. So the head of fundraising, the head of communications, and the head of program, and the person who works with the executive office, all their bosses have to say, yes, you're going to that meeting every month. And I want to report out from it from you. You tell me what you heard there. But you got to find ways to start changing the culture to get people involved, but they need to see it's important from all angles too. And then, it's pretty classic. They're like, what's in it for me? What's in it for that person? Why are they doing this? I think it was one of the larger nonprofits that I worked at one point. I came in and they had Salesforce, and then they were forcing everyone to use it, but they weren't telling them why. They weren't telling them why it was good or what they were going to get out of it, how their workday was going to get better, how anything they were doing was going to be better because it was just, you need to do this because we need adoption numbers. Like, well, that
Mm.
doesn't work. That just turns people off. The tool should make things easier, and if it doesn't, we should know that too because it's the wrong tool. Um,
So this sounds like for most of your engagements, you must have some sort of process to engage the C-suite.
100%. I think transformation, change management, it's an all-encompassing effort. You need to go both sides. One of the tactics I use in-house was I would talk to all the executives, but I talk to all the staff. So we'd have to figure it out. And I need to see where the gaps were between the people who are going to be using it and the people who were signing the contracts and assuming that the thing was going to work the way it was. You've got nothing if you don't have executive attention, at least.
Mhm.
That's really important because the staff wants to know I'm doing this. Oh, and they know I'm doing this, and they know it's not easy, and they know it's going to take time. The other thing I'd say to your audience, anyone's doing this work, expectation management, super important. There's this false assumption that in the 6-month contract to get some new tool put in place, and then at the end of that, we've done it, we transformed, everything's changed. That's not it. This stuff takes years, 2 to 3 years sometimes. And you got to be okay with incremental improvement, not, hey, by Tuesday, October 27th, we're going to be a whole new organization and everyone's going to be doing this new thing and it's going to be fantastic. It doesn't work like that. And
That there is a similarity between transforming an organization in relation to like putting together a CRM and putting in an SEO program.
right.
It's cross silo. It takes years, especially depending on what kind of process you have to change with folks writing, promoting, doing technical stuff.
My favorite was I launched a microsite once, and then I got an email 15 minutes after it went live, and it was like, "We're not number one on Google. What did you do wrong?"
Like, nowadays, we're like, Google hasn't indexed us yet. Unfortunately, that's the challenge sometimes.
It's only been 15 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. We're not CNN. They don't come around that quickly to see what's changed.
What are you going to do?
I know. So, are there any processes that you've implemented to be more persuasive as an outside agency over the years? Like as you've run your agency and learned more working with clients, is there particularly things that you think you've come up with and use regularly?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to sound, I don't know, hippy dippy, but I think it's the trust factor. It's how do you build a rapport? How do you get in and everyone, when they talk to you, they feel like they're really having an honest and frank conversation that they can be open with you about. I always tell people the reason you want us to come in and do the interviews is because the conversation that your colleague can have with the consultant is very different than the conversation they will have with you as the colleague that they're going to see Tuesday at the 10 a.m. meeting every Tuesday. So that they don't feel this. It's not like I hear bad things. It's just they're very honest with me in a way that I think they might be afraid it could hurt somebody that they're working with. And they don't want to be hurtful. Like everybody's very good. They all come with wanting the right intentions, but you need us to be able to come in and have that because we're neutral. Like, great. You didn't like that. You like this thing. That's wonderful. Other things inside of the process. I don't know if it's about persuasion as much as when you're getting buy-in, but we're brought in to look at a certain thing. So in those interview conversations, we'll slip ideas in. That's real. Like, hey, what did you think about this? Oh, that didn't work out well. Why didn't it? What changed? What did you think about doing something like this? And then you get a little bit of very soft feedback before you even start trying to push any ideas beyond, the stakeholder who did bring you in to look at specific areas. And that's a real nice way to collect some honest information real quick up front. And it also helps people then because they've heard it. So next time they start to hear something, it's not the first time they heard it.
It's like rule of 3, right?
Yeah.
Or 7, whatever the number is now.
Yeah. But it's hard and it's easier when they're hearing it in a small group or a one-on-one rather than they got invited to the executive meeting and they're the last executive who heard about this plan.
Yeah.
That's not going to go over well with anybody.
Yeah. Interesting. So pivoting a little bit to your team, is there anything that you do with your team members in relation to onboarding to make sure that they have the same DNA and are impactful with clients? There's something about your agency. I'm fascinated with this, by the way. I've asked this question with other podcast guests. Like, okay, so I can tell what your philosophy and DNA is related to interacting with your clients. How do you ensure that everybody at your agency has the same focus?
Yeah, we actually just had a really long leadership meeting yesterday. We were talking about positioning for our company and, coming through the pandemic and things we're doing. And we did I called it the lightning SWAT. But one of the questions is like, what have we been hearing from other people, that they like about us? And we hear from our own staff and from other people, they like our culture as a company. And I think we've invested in making people feel like they're a part of something because we've always been distributed, from day one. And you have to be really conscious and cognizant of building community when Zoom is really where we see each other all the time, Slack. And what we talked about yesterday was interesting is that one of the things we're starting to notice, I think, is when we work with clients, all of our work is it's some kind of change, right? There's some transformation happening. When they want that, when they want some culture change themselves, those projects go way better. Even if it's like, I don't understand this part, we're able to create much more of a trust more quickly. What we've run into is the one or two clients that they don't want to change. They
But they
don't want
still
to,
hired you.
they don't want the culture shift. Yeah, we can't work with someone who won't let us do interviews. Like that
Right.
became clear after the one who hired us and wouldn't let us do interviews.
Yeah.
It's these realizations you start to get over time. So I think that's part of it. I think our team feels trust in each other. And we have created that. I mean, one of our values is no one fails alone, or, you got to help each other out. We have Creativity Inc. I think it's one of the books I sent you to link. They took the idea of that from the Brain Trust, which I just loved, which is about Ed Catmull when he was starting Pixar. But the Brain Trust was this group of all the executives or other directors. And as you were making your film, if you wanted to come in and call them in and show them stuff, they are just there to give you all the feedback, but you didn't have to do anything with it. Even if they were the head of Pixar, you didn't have to do anything with it. But like, I'm just giving you these ideas. So we've initiated that in our company, the Brain Trust. And what I learned early in the company was I needed to show other people that I needed that help too. I was having too many one-on-one slacks with the other people I started the company with. And so over time, all this is public. Like, I don't know what I'm doing on this. Y'all, can you come in and help me? And then everybody throws ideas. I think that infuses itself back into our client relationships. I think the other thing we've always talked about here is I just remember when I was on the other side as a client in one group I was working with, and they just had bad company stuff happening. And when they came in, like that meeting was just awful. Like nobody wanted to go to it anymore. All the energy that came into the room was just wrong. And that is what with this company, I was like, we're never going to do that. And I've said it since we started, and I repeat it quite often. I want our clients to be like, I'm going to a meeting with Persuasive TKO. It's going to be the best part of my day. And if we can bring, and it's a job, and people, so like, you're not always, I can't make happiness happen, but if we can like feel good and we have the right energy, we're creating something together. I think that matters. And I think it helps our team when they hit the difficult spots, because I know they can talk to us too. And, as leaders, we're always ready to come in. I've probably had far more difficult conversations than anybody on staff. And I could either talk them through what they're hearing. And it's always this moment of, hey, sometimes it's actually not you. You're just there in the moment when someone else is having a moment and they're releasing it. But because you're an empathetic human being and we want you to be, you're taking on their emotions and you're probably not realizing it. So there's a lot of that we try to help with. And
I don't know. As I get further in my career, I'm very intrigued by energy, the energy you bring to something, right? And how that could pivot your success level. And I know when I'm going to do trainings, for instance, I certainly develop this different energy level around getting people excited about SEO. So do you have, particularly as you're walking into some of these tougher meetings, maybe, do you have anything that you get your team to do to be in the right mind space?
Well, there's one thing I always do is I do them more because we've started running online events every month at the beginning of the pandemic, because we were like, oh my God, we can't see people in person anymore. What do we do? But I have staff lead those. And what I always say is just smile and have fun. Like, you're about to hit the stage, like, have a good time. Like, you fumble on your word, you get the wrong slide, who cares? Like, have a good time. People have come to listen to you. I think that little triggers there. The other thing I'd say is another book I'd sent you is The Art of the Pitch. I read that when we were first starting out, but it really stuck with me in the like every angle of everything you're about to do when you go into a meeting matters. Like, think about the room. Are you standing or sitting? What are you wearing? What color? I even think about the color shirt I wear. Is this a calming color? Is this a color that has more of an excitability to it? Like, what am I trying to do when I'm in there? And I think about where I sit within now, because of Zoom, where I sit within my Zoom box. How do I see everybody on the screen? If you're going in person, think about the room ahead of time, know the technology ahead of time, be there early. Think about, if you have your team with you, where people on your team are sitting. Think about how you're going to coordinate and choreograph how they're coming. I feel like if you go in anything and you've prepared that well, what you're able to do then is to be able to react. Because what's going to happen is you have a great plan and you roll in and you got all the things you want to do. And then someone's going to interrupt. The president of the company is just going to say, well, I got a couple questions on X. Okay, well, it's up to you then. You command the room, because now if you can then take ownership of everything. Hey, I hear you on that. Let me get through two more things, and I'm absolutely going to get to all your questions. Now you just owned the room, and it didn't take much, but you being prepared. And it wasn't like you were trying to own it over somebody else, but what they're seeing in you is a lot of confidence. And when you're coming in as a consultant with the work you do, the work we do, they want to have confidence that you're going to be the people that help them get to the next place, because they've got a lot of anxieties. This feels risky. All the work we're doing in a digital space, and it's expensive. And they want to know that they're there doing it with someone who could make it right and make it work. And so they want that confidence. That's for me is a big thing. I mean, prepare. That's what we're paid for. We're paid to show up and be prepared.
Interesting. It's very similar to what my boss at Ketchum, Tim, so had us do. Because I remember a few meetings that we talked about where we're sitting. We talked about making sure we got the feds to break up where they were sitting and try to sit in between them. And I had a favorite suit jacket that was red that I loved, but I always had to look at it and be strategic about when I wore it. So it never went to any client meeting. If I had a day where it was just me and my colleagues in the office and I wasn't doing anything contentious, I got to wear it, but otherwise it didn't get a lot of airtime.
It'd be great for a speaking engagement too, though.
Oh,
You're
that's
the
right. I
featured
did wear
speaker.
it for
Yeah.
speaking engagements actually.
Mhm.
But not so much for any sort of other meeting.
I don't expect my staff to go to that level all the time, but it's when I talk to them, those are the things that I talk about and prepare. And, if we're really going to do a talk, can we practice it ahead of time? Like I've always just personally hated the first time I hear something coming out of my mouth is in the moment in front of everybody. It's like, oh, did that sound right? So,
Yeah.
it helps to practice these things ahead of time.
Yeah, we did some dry runs too. Not every meeting, but the ones that we thought were more important.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so I'm sure you experience moments of conflict in the moment in some of these meetings with your clients. How do you coach your team to actually handle some of those moments? You just mentioned one, which is like, I hear your question. I got two more things. I'll go back to you. Are there other things you sort of coach them about?
Yeah. I mean, I saw that question as we were getting ready for this, and I just thought about the word conflict. And I think it's taken on such a standoffish meaning in society anymore.
Mm,
And everything feels so ready to bubble to the surface. And maybe it's COVID and maybe it's everything. The other thing I used to say to people, my last job, and I like to say here, and I'm writing about, disagreement does not mean disrespect. And we have to learn how to talk to each other again. I am far more afraid of being in the meeting that's a creative or an idea meeting or planning, and everyone is just shaking their head yes, because
mm,
they've all got something else they want to say. They possibly cannot all agree that everything is just right. So just going along does not produce anything of really high value in the end, except resentment. And so, how do we really start to change that? Conflict is healthy in these things. Like, this is the diversity of ideas coming to fruition. It's how do we manage the meeting in the moment? So I think for us, one thing we've heard feedback wise when we've given some deliverables, the way we've done it, we've had teams come together. It's the first time we ever all sat with our colleagues. This is the first time I really saw what my colleagues were doing in this side of the building.
mm,
Like, this is really eye opening to me.
mm.
And we're able to facilitate that again because we're coming in as consultants, not colleagues, and they have to take the time to sit with us because somebody paid them. And it turns out to really be well for them. Ways to manage it. I mean, expect it, encourage the healthy part of it, try to get to the reason that it's there. And then, if you own a meeting, I think we've all over the years somehow lost how to manage meetings. But if you can manage the meeting, you can get the conflict out, you can record it. If it's relevant to the meeting, you can explore it. If it's not, you could say, I absolutely hear what you're saying. I'm going to put this over here because this is really important. But we do only have 15 minutes left, Gene. I got to get through the rest of this real quick.
Yeah.
People want to be heard. I'm far more afraid of silence. I'm far more afraid of the passive aggressive conflict
Yeah.
than I am anything explicit and external. Like if I'm seeing it, stop having the meeting outside of the meeting, have the meeting in the meeting. So I have the damn meeting.
Yeah.
You know,
Do you in your discovery, do you do a little bit of like personality flagging with some of your stakeholders? I'm only mentioning this because I know there's a few personality types where they're not the extroverted one that shares. So do you end up like literally recording that for your clients and then making sure you specifically ask certain people to participate?
yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I was thinking about that too when I was thinking about the questions. And it's in how you run the meeting. Or if you got to watch when everybody's being real silent, why is that person being so silent for so long? Is it because their boss is there and they don't want to talk in front of them? Is it because they are introverted? And there's tactics for that too. Have a freaking agenda. Send the agenda out ahead of time. Introverts want to think about things ahead of it, and they're going to come with great ideas. But when you hit them on the spot, you're going to get the person who reacts really well because they got a bunch of energy because people are around them and they love talking and they can't help themselves. It's you got to encourage that. I think you got to be able to spot that personality too inside of a group dynamic. It's a lot easier for us. This is why the one-on-ones and the small group interviews are so important, because no one's afraid to talk in those. Everybody. I get a little bit at first. You get a little, oh man, I got to spend this hour. We're like, okay, it's going to go faster than you think. And then they get into it, then they get talking. And by the end, they're like, that's so much more. This was great. Like, okay. But yeah, it's getting people into the groove. But you're right. Yeah. Managing a meeting and thinking about who's talking, why they're talking, the power dynamics of who's in the room, who did you invite into the room? All that matters. Yeah.
Do you rehearse some of that beforehand too, depending on how important the meeting is? If you know who's coming.
Yeah. We'd talk. Oh, it's not necessarily rehearse, but like who's coming? What do we know about who's going to be there? What do we need to hear? Like it's, if let's say there's heads of 6 different programs coming, it's a big org, and then some of their staff, but we know we really need to hear from one of the programs because we don't have as much information from them. It's like, all right, we got to find a way to make sure we get Bobby to talk in this one. How do we pull
Yeah.
this out of Bobby? So we could think about things like that ahead of time. And it helps our team too, just to sort of know who's going to be there ahead of time, and they can be prepared. Did I meet this person yet or not? Think
Right.
about that a little bit.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. So thank you for coming on and chatting with me. I've got a couple final questions I ask everybody.
Yeah, yeah.
So the first one is as marketers, we're constantly thinking about our audience and how to persuade them. So have you had a recent aha moment with either a client's target audience or yours that you thought was fascinating?
I was thinking, I was like, it's 2022 and quote Zoolander, like segmentation is so hot right now. Segment. I'm shocked, but people are still trying to figure out how to do segments, and they want to advance into more personalized type of emails using marketing automation tools.
Hmm.
And they don't have the initial, like, why would I segment a certain way? What do I really want to know? How would that build? So that's my thing. Diversify your audiences. You need to be able to segment to understand what you're doing within those messages. And I think you had said it earlier, stop having one message for every medium.
Right. Every
Think,
social media platform. Yeah.
right. Think about where you're putting it out. And hey, email's still really, really powerful tool. Invest in it and figure it out. Those are my.
I mean, these are all like it's more work, I realize, because usually there's like one social media person for every platform they've decided to be on. But all of these platforms use artificial intelligence to filter out your message. Full stop. One way or the other. If it's email, it's Gmail doing it.
Right.
And so you have to be targeted to your target audience. Same with SEO because it gets
Yeah.
filtered out. Um, so what's the win or resource you want to share with your audience today? I know that you've mentioned a ton that we're going to put in the show notes, different books.
Yeah, a lot of books. I would say, the big win. Ground yourself and know yourself. I think you've got to be, if you are a change agent, you've got to understand that it's can be good in the end, but not everybody wants it. Your job's to help them get through it sometimes and get to the next place. And you're going to feel heavy emotions from people. And you just need to know and have confidence in what you're doing, that it's right, that a lot of that negativity isn't about you personally. I've seen a lot of people in these positions. It's easy to burn out because you feel the weight of everything and you feel isolated and in an island. And like I talked about earlier, those are the things we 100% have been building to avoid in our company. No one here is on an island inside of Parsons TKO. And when we find those staff people with our clients, we've got to support them too, because they shouldn't be on an island either.
Yeah, I've been an internal change agent, and frankly, it only worked when I had a boss that had my back.
Mhm.
Otherwise, you're very exposed.
Yeah.
You know.
No, I
So
do.
how can people learn more about you?
Yeah, thank you. So check us out on our website, parsonstko.com. We have a ton of free resources. We do at least one free webinar every month, usually on a Wednesday. We got a newsletter. You can sign up. You get to know about all that. Sometimes we're doing events now back in person in the cities that we show up to. You can find out about that on the website. We have a podcast as well, which I'm going to be delightfully interviewing you on later this week too. So I'm
Right.
super excited about that. And if anyone wants to hit me personally, just find me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Tony Kopetchny, Kopetchny, that you will ever meet. I'm unique in that. So come find me. I'm on LinkedIn. I'd love to talk to you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. This is wonderful. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for listening. To find out more about the podcast and what we're up to, go to digitalmarketingvictories.com. And if you like what you heard, subscribe to us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Rate us, comment, and share the podcast, please. I'm always looking for new ideas, topics, and guests. Email us at digitalmarketingvictories@gmail.com or DM us on Twitter at DMVictories. Thanks for listening.